So, hi everyone. We are really happy to host today Ameh Moses. Ameh Moses is a PhD candidate of political science in the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. He holds a master's degree in international relations and bachelor's in political science from University of Ibadan and Kogi State University, respectively. He's currently a graduate research and teaching assistant at the Department of Political Science at the University of Ibadan, a recipient of Federal Government Scholarship Award for studies in tertiary institutions in Nigeria. And his research interest includes terrorism and counter-terrorism, national security, insurgencies, and the impact of conflict on the state. His current research intersects community policing and counterterrorism in northeastern Nigeria, with emphasis on intelligence gathering by local communities and governmental law enforcement agencies. The research is still a work in progress, so I hope that we'll be able to provide useful comments in the Q&A session. Ameh, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. I want to first of all appreciate the Maneuver Center for the opportunity. Yes, the Maneuver Center is through the University of Haifa in Israel for this opportunity to make my presentations today and for providing the support for my research. And I must also solemnly appreciate Dr. Mikal for carrying me along. She has done a very good job. I mean, the conversations, the kind of tutorship and mentorship she has given me over time through the emails has been awesome. So I want to drop the appreciation. So moving to my topic, community policing and counter-terrorism in the northeastern part of Nigeria. To do an intersection, I've divided my work into about I've divided the presentation for today into about 4 sessions. So the first session will look at the background to the study, the statement of the problem, proposed research questions and objectives. And the second session will just do a brief deliberation on the literature review I've done and the theory framework that will be used for this study. Then the third aspect of the work will look at the methodology, and the fourth aspect will look at justifying the study, significance of the study, and the scope of the study. So background to the study, terrorism in Nigeria. I know you all agree with me, even though the scholars have documented that it presents a challenge to the country's security and socio-political development. Yeah, the activities of groups like Boko Haram has led to loss of lives and properties over the years. And despite these concerns, community policing has been identified as a key strategy for preventing and responding to terrorism at the local level, with emphasis on problem solving, intelligence gathering, and community engagement. So community counterterrorism itself, is key for the problem of insecurity in Nigeria. And I mean, the northeastern part of the country has been posed with a lot of insecurity issues. I myself used to live in the northeastern part of Nigeria. I grew up in the north of Nigeria. So I remember growing up that a lot of families had to leave the northeastern part of Nigeria because when the insecurity problem started, Boko Haram began to gain grounds. There was a lot of displacement. So from my study, I was able to also mention that about over 1.6 million people have been internally displaced over the years. And studies have also shown that Boko Haram has become the most deadliest terror organization between 2009 and 2017. So over 6,500 people have been killed by this sect, and it has been terrible. Yeah, this study intends to address these issues by examining the implementation, challenges, and outcome of community policing in the context of counter-terrorism efforts in Nigeria. And yeah, existing studies discuss the effectiveness of community policing in general, but really focus on its specific impacts in Maiduguri, which is my area of study. And this study will be investigating the experiences and effectiveness of community policing practices in combating terrorism. The research aims to provide valuable insight into the role of community engagement, trust building, and partnership, which makes up the concept of community policing, law enforcement agencies and local communities in preventing crime and terrorism. So it is this gap in literature which I intend to fill. The region-specific data has led to my coming up with questions and objectives. What has been the role of community policing in addressing the difficulties of terrorism in Nigeria? How have community policing been integrated or used for Nigeria's counterterrorism measures and strategies? What are the advantages that community policing bring into countering terrorism? How can community policing be better utilized in countering terrorism? So this is my research objective, to examine the role of community policing in addressing the issues of terrorism in Nigeria's Northeast, to assess how community policing has been integrated or used for Nigeria counter-terrorism measures, the strategies, examine the advantage. I specifically also want to look at what advantage community policing bring, even though studies and scholars are beginning to say that community policing have failed because the Nigerian government has particularly taken a more military-centric approach in dealing with the issue of countering terrorism in the Northeast and even other parts of Nigeria, because in current times, we have a new sect of terrorism emerging from the northwestern part of Nigeria. They are called the Lakurawa sect, and it is beginning to spring up another issue of insecurity for Nigeria as a country. And majorly, the decisions that have been taken by the government is to use the military approach to just bombard this group of people. But then my study really wants to do an intersection of community policing, how have the partnership, trust, and engagement by law enforcement agencies and the communities have brought about countering terrorism. So my literature review covers the review and delves into the concept of community policing. Here, I was able to review the variables, which is community policing and counter-terrorism with adaptations. It advents in Nigeria. Various subsections explore the progress of community policing over time. I've also been able to look at I gave the historical context of community policing around the world, from some parts of the United Kingdom to the US. And furthermore, the sections shed more light on the context of Boko Haram insurgency, most especially in the northeastern part of Nigeria. So my study will be guided by two theories: the social capital theory and the human security theory. The social capital theory assumes that the social connections within a community and their capacity to collaborate is valuable resource that can be utilized. In the context of policing in Maiduguri, Borno State, with regards to counter-terrorism, social capital comes to play as a way through which the police can engage with members of the society in order to fight insurgency and insecurity. Yeah, social capital is about the engagement of the law enforcement agencies and the people. So that relationship, what relationship has been on ground between these two particular groups to ensure that there is safety of people. The human security theory, on the other hand, helps in analyzing ways through which the community policing programs make Maiduguri residents safe and more dignified, because our key area of study is the capital city of Borno State, which is Maiduguri, and which is a place that has been largely affected by the Boko Haram insurgents in the last 12 to 15 years. And interestingly, I must also state that there is still insurgency in the Northeast, and especially in Boko Haram, because even in the news 2024, we have had quite some number of attacks. We have read about quite some number of attacks in the news in 2024. So there is still insurgency, and even though the government has taken a more military approach to deal with the issue, what role has community policing played in the insurgency of the Northeast? So the relevance of these theories to the research For the social capital theory, the core of the community policing is trust. The issue of trust, cooperation, and networks. The theory concentrates on restoring the demoralized relationship between the police and the public, which is very vital for intelligence. Now, when Boko Haram started in 2009 in the northeastern part of Nigeria, studies showed that it was more it was the police that tried to handle the issue over time, but it's like the police were not able to handle the issue and the military had to take over. So then community policing came in with the advent of groups like the Civilian Joint Task Force, which make up more of the communities and the local enforcement agencies. So much of this study wants to look at the reasons why community policing is failing, or what are those things that have not been put in place to make community policing succeed. So the human security theory extends the two by associating community policing with safety of individuals from threats like terrorism, as well as structural risk, including poverty and social inclusion. So for my research methodology, which is also important for this study, my research will be guided by a qualitative method to collect comprehensive and reliable data. The entire research plan is based on the concepts of right research methodology, the alignment of epistemology, ontology methods, and data in a well-articulated manner. For my research design, the research will utilize a descriptive research design to examine the relationship between community policing and counter-terrorism in Borno State. Research will employ the in-depth interview and key informant interview as a qualitative approach for this research, as it prioritizes depth, context, and participant perspective, making it suitable for exploring complex and nuanced research questions. So the study area for my research is Maiduguri, the capital of Borno State, like I earlier mentioned, with over 5 million people making up the state, having an agrarian economy that has suffered from Boko Haram and ISWAP violence in the last 10, 15 years, ensuring displacement and stagnated economy, accounting for over 1.6 million internally displaced persons in Maiduguri, is still experiencing significant humanitarian crisis, shelter, food, inadequate camps, accommodation, and protection incidents such as sexual exploitation, especially towards females and children. So this is my study area, and this is my study population. My study population, my study population has been divided into 4. I'll be looking at law enforcement agencies. I'll be looking at local government officials in Maiduguri. I'll be looking at civil society and non-governmental organizations. I also try to engage experts, researchers, and academics who will have key information I will be needing for my data collection in that line. So for the law enforcement agencies, I'll have to interrogate police officers. In Maiduguri, I'll have to interrogate military personnel who have expert information, key information. I'll have to interrogate the community police there, which is the CJTF, the Civilian Joint Task Force that was adopted and put in place to combat the terrorism in Borno State. I also try to obtain data from state officials who will have been responsible for some of the policies that have been put in place to ensure that there is counter-terrorism. Then traditional community leaders who have also played a role in terms of intelligence gathering and who have ensured trust between the police and the people. Then non-governmental organizations who also have a role to play with the issue of security. And then the researchers and academics who also have written quite a number of journals, articles, and done studies on the issue of security in Borno State. So for my sampling technique I was able to just focus on a purposive sampling technique. So I purposively selected my study population, and my location for study is Maiduguri, like I said, which is the capital city of Borno State. And I'll be carrying out 2 in-depth interviews for the Nigerian police and 1 key informant interview on the Nigerian police, which makes up 3 for the Nigerian police force. Then for the Nigerian Army too, I'll carry out 3, which is 2 in-depth interview and 1 key informant interview. Then for the community police, which is the civilian joint task force, I'll also carry out 2 in-depth interview and 1 key informant interview. For the state officials in Borno State, for traditional rulers, CSOs, and academics, I'll carry out 2 in-depth interview and 1 key informant interview, which makes up a total of about 21 interviews I'll be carrying out with a guided research instrument question interview style of collecting data. So the sources of my data collection will be the KII and the IDI to be able to answer my research objectives, and my data collection will get its sources from the IDI, KII, and extant literature, which I'll also be engaging. So I'll have to also try and make quality progress with my literature review so that I could find more gaps in literature. And the method of data analysis that will be employed for the study will be the discourse analysis and the thematic analysis for all research objectives. And then for the justification of the study, my study will be addressing a critical gap in literature. The study aims to contribute to filling this crucial gap, which is the lack of a region-specific data, Borno State's lack of region-specific data, and the role of cultural practices in shaping counter-terrorism. The research is also relevant for national security. Nigeria has faced persistent challenges from various extremist groups, particularly in the Northeast. These groups pose a significant threat to national security, stability, and the well-being of communities. Investigating the role of community policing in addressing these threats is not only academically significant, but also directly relevant to national security for a country like Nigeria. And the scope of my study will be, the primary scope of my study will be Maiduguri, which is the capital city of Borno State in the Northeast. And the temporal scope of my study will be between 2010 to 2024. That's a period that Boko Haram has been heightened and over the years. So the significance of my study is to make sure that there is empowerment for local communities. How has local communities been engaged to counter terrorism? My study will also be contributing to the academic knowledge and to also guide international interventions for international actors who may want to support the counter-terrorism in Nigeria. This study will definitely be relevant. Then that's questions, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ameh. It was really interesting. The floor is open for questions. If you have a question, just raise your virtual hand. Yes, Ben.
Okay. Yes, and just hi, Ameh. Very interesting talk, and yeah, quite an interesting topic, and it has also applications to other places in the world, so that's also important. I was going to ask, what do you mean by community policing? What is community aspect? I mean, it can mean different things by different people. I mean, is it a neighborhood law enforcement, or is it more of a state? Is it a tribal internal thing? Can you be more explicit about what you mean by that? And I mean, when you come to think of it, does it have different types of law enforcement means than, let's say, a state official? And is there any difference?
Okay, yeah. Community policing in general is actually a type of model that has been adopted by the policing system to counter terrorism. And to define it in itself, it is actually the collaboration that takes place between communities and the law enforcement agencies to ensure that crimes are being prevented. So that is the meaning for community policing.
Just a small follow-up before Nadeem. I mean, does it mean that is it different types of law enforcement means, different mechanisms than let's say regular policing, or is it just like the size of, or maybe can you just? I mean, you need some more. I think it's an important.
Okay.
And I think maybe you should be more about it.
Yeah. For community policing itself as a concept, it is supposed to mean the regular policing. As the regular police that every state, probably at the local or the federal level, have. That's what the community policing really means. But over time, states have brought up security personnel that come together, including communities and the police. It could be law enforcement agencies who bring out certain individuals, or the police who bring out certain individuals who make up a group of people who become like the community police. So like in Nigeria now, particularly the Northeast, we have the Civilian Joint Task Force, which makes up of both the police and the army at different levels, and some members of the communities like the vigilante groups, which make up the Civilian Joint Task Force. So that makes up the community police in itself.
Nadiv?
Hi, everybody. Hi, Moses. Thank you for your presentation and for an interesting research proposal, elaborate research proposal. I have a question and a comment. So maybe I will start with the question. You left me at least extremely interested when reading your proposal, because eventually what you are obviously promoting is an interesting question. But I wanted to ask something that does not appear in the proposal, and that is, what are your hypotheses? So you obviously are trying to promote or to empirically investigate how this paradigm of community policing could be implemented, but I haven't seen in the proposal, and maybe this is something that you don't have yet, that's okay. But if you can share with us, what are your hypotheses about this venture of community policing within the area of Nigeria you are researching? Is it something that can be effective? What are the conditions in which it could be effective? And so on and so forth. So that is the question. The other comment that I maybe wanted to suggest is that I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you are trying to research community policing in a relatively large geographical area, even though it's not the whole country, but still it's kind of a large area. And I think that I could utilize the Israeli case study in order to give you an advice or maybe a question regarding the different areas of different ethnic or civilian population and the relation between that and the possibility of community policing. So, for example, in Israel, we have two main areas in which the police is involved in security operation or in military operation. One of them is the relationship between the police and the Arab minority within Israel, mainly in North Israel. And the other one is the engagement of the police in the occupied territories. And I think this is not my research field, so I'm kind of modest here, but I think that the research in this area implies that if you are interested in the level of trust, there's a strong relevance to different levels of conflict and different levels of social integration. And maybe you can design your research geographically speaking, or if you research different police stations and so on and so forth, in this way, because what you see, for example, in Israel, that policing in the occupied territories that are enjoying high level of conflict and extremely low level of integration is totally collapsing into the paradigm of militarization and military operation, as opposed to policing within the Arab minority in Israel, which is a situation that enjoys relatively low level of conflict and relatively medium levels of social integration. You're interested in social capital, of course, so it's extremely relevant. And there you can see that there's an incremental relevance for the paradigm of community policing. So this comment is all about trying to differentiate between different situations within these fields of studies and within the geographical scope that you are interested in. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Nadif, for your comments.
Nadim, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I've taken note of that. I think I took note of the level of conflict. And about your question, for me, the hypothesis is something I would love to answer from my research. If there's a significant relationship between community policing and countering terrorism in the Northeast Nigeria, or if there is no significant relationship. But on a long run, I realized that the objectives I've been able to come up with are objectives that my respondents will be those who have played a role in community policing, or those who have an idea of the kinds of approaches that the security have been using to manage the situation in Borno State. So that's it, sir.
Yes, Robert. You're muted.
Mute myself to be helpful. Yeah, sorry. First of all, thank you again for the introduction to your research. What I would like to ask two questions coming out of lack of knowledge. Okay, that's because the first one is, can you just demonstrate if there are cases that community policing were involved in counterterrorism in Nigeria? Because for people who lack the experience in Nigeria, it seems to me that I would be very happy to know more about it. It would give more, like, materialization to your questions. If there were issues like that, questions like that, there were cases where clashes happened between community police and terrorism, and what happened there. That's like, just to give like more background to the question, which seems to be very interesting. And the other issue, coming from the legal perspective, I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand what are the powers that are given to community police, and because it's delicate balance between government power and local powers, and it differs in different countries. So I'm very interested to hear about how it goes in Nigeria. Do you have like specific powers to go and enter any establishment? Do you need a search warrant? Who will give that search warrant? And just to give to understand how the community police will actually deal with counterterrorism. What powers will it have to deal with it? Because one of the issues could be that more powers or lack of powers influence the ability of the community police to deal with the counterterrorism. So, and there could be a dark side for that too, because once you empower local forces, that could be very dangerous to the integration of a state, the state as such. Okay, so that's this interplay between government and local forces. It's very interesting to me, both on the the general level and on the legal aspect too.
Okay, to answer your first question about the clashes to paint a scenario, over time I grew up in the north, so I have an idea of some of the happenings, especially when it has to do with the intervention of the police itself per se, we have scenarios where there could be crime, and because community policing has to do with the trust between the community and the police end up not responding as when they ought to respond. So that is like an issue, and that has downplayed the effort of community policing in itself, which is a trust issue. And then about the second question you asked, I would say, yeah, powers, there's actually a lack of power that's been given to the community, because when power is being given to the local security at the local level, they may end up misusing the power. So, but like in a place in the Northeast, which is the area of study, because of the heightening level of the insurgency, the Nigerian government had to come up to agree that, okay, we'll bring in a kind of model which was actually the community policing model, where a group of people came together, making up the military, the police, and vigilante groups. There was a network issue. Okay, yeah. So I don't know where I stopped, but I think I was answering the issue of the powers. The issue of powers has been allocated at the local level for the community agents that are in charge of countering terrorism. So yeah, studies have shown that not much power is given to the local level agencies to combat terrorism. But like the Civilian Joint Task Force I mentioned, the CGTFs, they have invested with the power to really combat the insurgent activities, but their efforts did not play very, very significant, did not measure up a very, very significant impact, like the impact that the military approach has in subduing the activities of the insurgent groups. So that's it.
So I have a couple of questions. The first is, if we want to learn more generally about the use of police or communal police in counterterrorism, I wonder what are the specific factors that shape the conflict in northern Nigeria that we should take account for when we try to think about other places. So, for example, is the local population generally supportive of Boko Haram or actually opposite? I think that it really affects the ability to cooperate with the local population. The second is, I think that it also came with in some of the questions, is what is the intensity of the conflict, right? If it's really close to a full-fledged war, then it might shape our decision whether to use policing or the military and so on. So I wonder, right, so how would you describe the main factors that shape the conflict in northern Nigeria? Second is, and maybe it relates to Robert's question, some of us are international lawyers, so this is how we think. When I think about the difference between policing and military and the use of the military, I immediately think about the debates whether we should deal with the situation using a law enforcement model or an armed conflict model. And I'm not sure whether it depends specifically or if we call it police or the military, but it relates to the legal framework that we apply. And sometimes the decision to use the police or the military is shaped by the way that the government or the other actors think about the situation as a situation of an armed conflict. And it also relates to the intensity, right? So, and I wonder to what extent, if any, these considerations are part of what you study.
Okay. To answer the first question about the specific factors, I understand that part of the factors that have shaped the insurgency in the Northeast over time has been religion. Religion has played key role, and then religion, the insurgent groups have advocated against against they have, I would say, the beliefs that have been taught by some of those insurgent leaders, advocating for a kind of belief to fight and then to try and reach out, get their own state to fight to gain grounds at the Northeast, like politically now fighting because they feel that they are not well represented in the country, so they try to get their own grounds, and other factors like the illiteracy on part of a good number of the youths, which has led to unemployment, has also caused these insurgent groups and leaders to spread their beliefs and win the heart of so many youths who were able to join the insurgents and also fight the Nigerian government, and also led to their terrorism. So, and then the area of study, the locals, I cannot really tell if they have been supportive or oppose, or they have played more of the opposition. But I would say that from what I've seen, the local communities in the Northeast have been supportive, I would say, and quite a number of camps internally displaced camps of people over time has shown that the people do not really want this. The people do not really want this, but the insurgents have come to stay, and it has gained more grounds in the Northeast. And like as I was telling Dr. Mikal before we started the presentation, I said we are in a situation where some of these crises and terror have even been sponsored by people who are in power in the country. So, and we cannot really prove that, but there are things that have been seen, tapes that have been played and all that to prove that there are people that are fostering these things behind. So, but still, I've come to agree that the local communities, especially in the Northeast, are supportive of the law enforcement agencies trying to fight it. But then, because the law enforcement agencies have not been able to totally play a very, very significant role and effort, then the military approach becomes very, very glary and takes more shape in combating the terrorist activities. But like the objective of my study wants to really dig deep into the role that community policing has actually played in countering terrorism. Okay, probably I did not answer the second question as I ought to. Maybe you could just still buttress on the second question so that I'll get it.
The second question relates to the potential difference between the legal regime that applies to armed conflicts and law enforcement operations, and often it depends on the level of intensity of the conflict. And I wonder to what extent this is what determines whether the focus is on using local police or the military that involves in the region, or maybe it's a manipulation, or to what extent, what role does it have on the use of police in your study?
Oh, okay, yeah. I would say from 2009, 2010, when the Boko Haram activities began to heighten, it actually started with the use of the local community policing approach to mitigate the conflict and the crisis of terror. But along the line, there was intensity with the terror groups. The terror groups had really falsified themselves, and it was well planned. They knew what they were doing, and they knew what they were up to. So the local police could not manage the situation. So between 2011 to 2017, the local police could not manage the situation at all. The Nigerian government had to deploy the military approach to. So within that period, the insurgents was very, very intensified. But from 2018 till now, there is a kind of the intensity by the insurgent groups has reduced. And that is why this study wants to look at, okay, what efforts have the local communities and the community police play, in as much as we know that the military has done a very good job in combating the terrorist activities.
Fadi?
Hey, Ameh, it sounds like a fascinating project, but also a huge undertaking. So I have two questions, and I don't know if you are able to answer them now, but I think they would be pivotal for the eventual project.
Okay.
The first would be kind of building on the first question that Benny asked. So we understand the general concept of community policing, but to the extent that your project seeks to answer or address the objective of whether or not community policing is an effective tool in combating terrorism, it sounds like you need to adhere or adopt a working model that actually that you'd be assessing or evaluating. So both, I guess, your presentation and your the document that was sent does not really delve into any specifics of the model on the ground that has been adopted or maybe suggested, I wasn't sure, in Nigeria to kind of transform local police departments or groups into community police or under the community police paradigm. So that's the first, like the actual model that you're dealing with. Does it have any particular characteristics? Does it have any unique aspects that are very tailored to the Nigerian experience? Do we have other examples that might be kind of juxtaposed to what's happening in Nigeria? So that's one thing. The other thing might be a little beyond the scope, but to me, whenever I hear that police is involved in counterterrorism efforts, it sounds like the scope of powers that is granted to such a agency is beyond what you would expect for regular criminal or counter crime efforts. And intuitively, I would assume that the more power police has to encroach on privacy, on human rights, on the communities that it's policing, the less trust one can expect to happen. And maybe I'm being overly simplistic, but is there an inherent tension in discussing the topic you're trying to discuss in counterterrorism and community policing? I hope the second question is clear, but if it's not, it's okay.
Okay, yeah,
I'd love to hear your answer.
Okay, I get it. For the first question about the model, I think I'll have to do a more literature review, do my findings to go and sit down to uncover the models that have been used over time and come up with something very, very specific. So that is what I've agreed on doing for the first question you asked about the model, the unique aspect of the community police that has been adopted in Nigeria. Then for the second question, I also agree with you that more powers, when granted to the police in itself, usually leads to lack of trust between the people and the law enforcement agencies. So I would say that since my study wants to look at the role that community policing have played, I could begin to say that the reasons why the community police in itself may not have been able to do much is because when more powers are granted to them, it causes for a distrust with the people. And this may also cause them not to be able to do much when it has to do with countering terrorism. So
Do we have more questions? Yes, Michal.
I was wondering about the tools. It's connecting to what Robert asked, but when you talk about community policing, are you talking about armed power, or do you also consider soft powers, like in education or other communal things that can enhance the social capital and give the community powers that are not in arms, in different tools? I mean, what are the tools that are you looking at when you're talking about community policing? Is it just power, or is it also other things?
okay, like for the Northeast itself, I have discovered that the powers that were granted to the community police were armed powers. So, but for my study, my focus will be looking at the intelligence gathering by the local communities and the law enforcement agencies to see how they could provide information for agencies, security personnel that are in charge of combating the terrorist group. So I would say that police are supposed to have soft powers, but like the FGs I mentioned, the Civilian Joint Task Force I mentioned, were granted armed powers to combat the insurgent groups.
Yes, Benny.
Yes, I wanted to follow up Fadi's last comment about this tension, because I find it very interesting, because I mean, I deal a lot about law enforcement power inside the domestic system, regular law enforcement power, and there's a whole idea of also community policing, with also trying to reach out to the community, and the whole tension that once you give and especially, let's say, in Israel, in the Israeli context, where there's also lots of issues with, on the one hand, regular policing, on the other hand, issues of terror. So when you allow police to deal with issues of terror, so then they use very harsh force on regular civilians. Like they bring in to the domestic policing all kinds of tools that should not be used on regular civilians, and they use it just because they're already using it in other domains, like issues of terror. And so when you're doing another layer, you're doing it like how does community policing address? How can we use community policing to address terror? And then you reach out what Fadi, I think that's what I understood about his tension, or that's what I thought about it, is that it brings in to the community policing all kinds of tools I don't think we want to have in community policing. All kinds of harsh, very fierce police use of force, of arrest and search warrants that were maybe without any, I don't know, with eavesdropping and so forth, which I'm not sure, particularly with community policing, which is supposed to be more of a soft power, which create trust with the community, and it might kind of distort the whole concept of community policing. So I think that's an interesting point that's worth thinking about.
Okay. Thank you very much for that contribution. I think I've noted that community policing itself should take form of more soft power and not the harsh power, because harsh power brings about the issue of distrust. So I think that is noted.
Ameh, do you have something to add in general after hearing all of the questions?
Okay, yeah. Well, I would say that specifically I was able to pick that I'll have to go back and look at my literature. Then I'll have to be able to come up with a more specific model of the kind of community policing that has been used in Nigeria broadly and specifically in the Northeast. But like I said, I'm sure of the CGTFs, which included the Nigerian police, the armed forces, and members of communities that make up the vigilante groups. But the community policing context that was used there was the harsh powers and use of arms to combat the terror group, because the terrorist activities began to heighten and before the military took over. But lastly, I will just say that I'm sure with the engagement of Dr. Mikal and other scholars and academics who may be interested, I will be able to come up with something more solidified.
Great. So please join me in thanking Ameh for presenting such an interesting research proposal. And we'll see you soon in our next session.